Hello. Today I'd like to talk about the world as 2016 started and how we find ourselves at this time from the geopolitical perspective. As I said before, we have three main actors: United States, China, and Russia in the conflict of today. And then, of course, we have the European Union, which is an ally of the United States. But these things are not entirely, they have different perspectives, because the European Union, there are many countries, about 27 or 28 today, but there are different countries. But as a whole, they are very important actors as well. We have to refer to Germany, UK, and France as the main actors in the European Union. And then we have the second echelon, as to say it, which might be Poland, Italy, and Spain. And the other ones are of lesser importance. So it's a sui generis union, which is in crisis as well. We have different crises in different areas. The Chinese have their crisis, the United States, the European Union, of different types. So, but crisis is taken the word from the, I think, from the medical profession, and that was taken from the Greeks, is a sudden alteration of the vital signals. So we have alteration of the vital signals and of the normal way of developing, or the normal way of processing or behaving. Let's start with the United States. This year is an election year, and the United States is the hegemonic powers of today, and trying to remain as the first and new power in the world. I think I like to think about all the living organisms. They have an impulse, which is to exist. And to exist, they have to struggle with other organisms, with the ecosystem. So the human organizations, which today are called states, and now the states, they may evolve to what they call empires, which is, empire is to be able to put upon others their own will. And sometimes they're successful, sometimes not, but always they find challenge. Like any ruling group, always will have some other groups that will challenge their power. So the United States find a challenge of its powers in China and in Russia. It doesn't find challenge of its powers in the European Union, because the European Union is some sort of creation of the United States after the Second World War. It's not exactly a creation. NATO was the creation. But the European Union was something that evolved within the Europeans themselves to try to be an important actors in this century. Now, that is to be seen where the European Union may be able to exist in consideration of the diversity of the nations and the different cultures. So we have the central cultures, the northern cultures, and the Mediterranean, and the Anglo-Saxons. So it's very difficult to have always an agreement, a cooperation. I think about the states in itself, the nations. The nations always have the problem that there might be north and south, or different parts of the nations, and different developments, and different ways, and sometimes they need help from the other parts of the nations. They receive transfers, but in the European Union, where different nations, they're very reluctant to help another nation which is not very successful, or which happened to made mistakes or whatever. And always a given group trying to impose their will to another group, in a nation, in organizations, in all the collectives, human groups. So that's the way we are, and that's how we are living today. And we translate this to geopolitical terms, we find the same problems. The important actors and actions are in Asia. Asia involved the Middle East, Central Asia, involved the Russian part, China, Japan, India, and then the lesser actors. And what they find, what they have all in common: mistrust. They don't trust others completely. And in international relations, there is every nation are to exist by their own means, and if they find problems or if they are attacked, unless they have alliance, nevertheless they always by their own. Of course we have United Nations that try to solve these problems, but the United Nations is not a democratic institution, because the United Nations have the veto power of United States, of China, of France and the UK. So it's not democratic. The assembly might vote for something, but they are not binding. So, but it's organization that it helps. It helps because all the nations can go on, have their views, and some lesser problems can be solved. Lesser problems. When the problems and the conflict are within the powers that have the veto powers, especially Russia, China, and United States, is a different story, because any one of those powers can do something that not the other powers may risk. A war, which today a war might imply a nuclear war. I'm convinced that as long as there is not a direct confrontation, that might be avoided. But anyhow, there are other powers which are nuclear powers: India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea, a lesser nuclear power. Now, those things may get out of hands in a confrontations. We had in the past almost a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, which was at the last minute avoided by the intervention, I think, of President Clinton. And we have Israel, which can project power, nuclear power, and it's something that is not talked about in the mass media. But they have the missiles, I think the Jericho, 5,000 kilometers. They can do any attack within 5,000 kilometers, a nuclear attack. They said they have about 150 to 100 atomic bombs of different types. Who can control them? China has about 200 or 300 nuclear bombs, which are not enough to start a nuclear attack. And I don't think there is a desire from the Chinese people to attack anyone, especially the United States, and much less a nuclear attack. It's almost unbelievable. But the two powers that has thousands of nuclear power, atomic bombs, nuclear bombs, United States and Russia, they have enough in their stock to do a nuclear attack, to perform a nuclear attack. Because think about that type of warfare. Think that there are two phases of the attack. The first one is against power, and the second one is against potential. What do they mean? Power is an attack, a sudden attack to all the installation of nuclear missiles in the other sides. A surprise attack. And the second one is to city dams, whatever you might think, whatever crazy thing you might think, that's on their plans. I hope something like this never happens, but it's a possibility. So that's, I always, when I think about this and I talk about this, I like to point out the dangerous situations that the whole humanity is involved in this type of conflict. It seems to me that as humans we never learn about the possibilities of something like this to happen. Having said that, in other areas of conflict, since is the economic conflict, since all the main actors, 99% of the countries of the world are capitalist countries in different styles, but they are capitalist. So they are in competition with each others. That's what capitalism is all about. The competition and the selfishness and the profit. And that produces a type of consumers which are needed for the capitalist expansion. They call it consumerism. And that from the anthropological perspective, we might find the people consumericus or something like this in Latin. They are very happy to consume anything, and that's how capitalist system works. As long as people consume, and as long as they fulfill their needs or what they think are their needs. Of course, from the Lacanian perspective, their needs never ends. We are sort of desiring organisms or persons or humans that we always find new desires. And from the Freudian perspective, both pulses, eros and thanatos, that drive us individually and collective. Now, those things fit perfectly well in the capitalist philosophy. Desire, aggression, and pleasure with no limit. And that's what I think it come out very naturally, and that's why make the capitalists successful in a way. And the hard thing is to change these attitudes and to change these pulsions, which I think that might be very, very difficult. Churches, they always try to say love each other, be compassionate, help the poor, all those things. And well, they are not very successful. Sometimes they are a little bit successful, but not much. And socialists, they like to do it in a practical way. They try to do it the last century. It started with the idea of the Soviet Union, the idea of the socialists, and the utopian idea of communism that could never be realized. But socialism was, and it still is, a possibility. What the Baltic countries, and some northern Europeans, they implement the social democracy, which is some sort of socialism within the capitalist system. But since they don't live in a vacuum, and the world is going to the hard side of the capitalism, they have to try to adapt themselves to the world we live in. And I think I'd like to stop here, but that's where we are. And I hope things might change. Of course, change is always, life is change, permanent change. But I hope will change for the better. But nothing will change by itself unless people, the great majority of people, move and exert pressure on their rulers, the group that rules in every society. And since there are so many different cultures in the world, it's very difficult to have an harmonious coexistence, because different countries try to take advantage of the others in many ways. And they do this by two reasons. First, because capitalism needs to expand, need to produce, and need consumers. And then because there are national groups, they like to impose their will in others when they can. And they do it in very varied ways. So my perception is that we go on living in a very conflict situations, but about 20% or 30% of the population of the 7 billions, they fulfill their needs. And of course they always have expectations, but I don't think they're in their minds to change the present situation. And when the crisis arises, like in Europe, they, instead of going to a cooperative and solidarity, they go the other way. They go to the far right. And those systems started with Mussolini, Franco, and Hitler. And they're called today the neo-Nazis. In other words, when crisis arises in the capitalist world that we live today, the answer by the active groups is going to the right, to more radical capitalist systems. And the resistance to this system, planetary system, since the end of the Soviet Union, is very, very soft. It's not strong enough. And the polls in the elections show us that the views of the idea of socialism didn't die, of course, fortunately, but they are not as strong. But since life is change, there's always a possibility that we change for the better. Thank you.